Section 1. A primer on tariffs. Understanding the basics of trade taxes. A tariff is a government tax on imported goods and services designed to make foreign products more expensive and encourage domestic consumption. Historically, tariffs have protected local industries and served as political tools, but they also raise prices for consumers and can disrupt supply chains. The revenue from tariffs, called customs duties, goes directly to the government and can be significant. However, tariffs can increase production costs for businesses reliant on imports, potentially fueling inflation. In the U.S., Congress holds the constitutional power to impose tariffs and regulate commerce, though some authority has been delegated to the president in emergencies. The core issue is who decides when and how tariffs are used: Congress, with its explicit constitutional powers, or the president, through broad emergency powers. This tension is central to the controversy over the Trump-era tariffs and the Supreme Court case that followed. Section 2. The Trump tariffs. A new era of economic policy. In early 2025, former President Trump dramatically shifted U.S. trade policy by imposing sweeping tariffs on nearly all imports via executive orders. These tariffs, justified by national security and economic concerns, targeted goods from Canada, China, and Mexico over fentanyl trafficking, and imposed reciprocal tariffs on most other countries. The administration cited the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, claiming the fentanyl crisis and unfair trade practices justified emergency action. Trump defended the tariffs as vital for national security and economic stability, but critics called it the largest peacetime tax increase in U.S. history. The tariffs were projected to generate $3 trillion in revenue, but businesses and consumers faced soaring costs. Companies dependent on imports saw profit margins shrink or passed costs to customers, triggering a nationwide economic shock. The broad, immediate impact set the stage for a major legal battle over presidential authority. The controversy quickly became a defining issue of the administration. Section 3. The legal challenge. Small businesses and states fight back. The tariffs sparked immediate legal challenges from a coalition of small businesses, large corporations, and states, arguing the president had overstepped constitutional bounds. Small businesses like Learning Resources faced catastrophic cost increases, threatening their survival. The challengers argued tariffs functioned as a tax, a power reserved for Congress, not the executive. States joined, citing harm to local economies and the undermining of their own authority. The lawsuits were consolidated and fast-tracked, with opponents insisting IEEPA was never meant to grant the president unchecked power to impose massive taxes. Their core argument: only Congress can levy taxes, and any delegation of that power must be explicit and limited. The stage was set for a constitutional showdown over the limits of executive authority. When the consolidated cases reached the Supreme Court, the central conflict was clear. The administration, represented by Solicitor General D. John Sauer, argued IEEPA gave the president broad authority to regulate imports, including imposing tariffs during emergencies. They claimed tariffs were a traditional tool of trade regulation, and Congress had knowingly granted this flexibility. The challengers, led by attorney Jeffrey Schwab, countered that IEEPA never mentions tariffs, duties, or taxes, and Congress had passed other laws with explicit limited tariff authority. They argued the president could not use vague emergency powers to bypass clear legislative limits. The challengers invoked the major questions doctrine. Actions of vast economic and political significance require clear, explicit congressional authorization. Imposing a $3 trillion tax, they said, was a major question. IEEPA lacked the necessary clarity. Upholding the tariffs, they warned, would dangerously shift Congress's core taxing power to the president. The Supreme Court was tasked with deciding whether IEEPA truly authorized such sweeping executive action. The outcome would redefine the balance of power in American government. Before reaching the Supreme Court, the case moved through lower courts, where judges consistently sided with the challengers. The U.S. Court of International Trade and a district court both found the president had exceeded his authority under IEEPA. Judges ruled that while the president can regulate trade in emergencies, imposing a massive tax is a legislative power reserved for Congress. The Federal Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed these rulings, emphasizing the major questions doctrine. The court stated that a multi-trillion-dollar tax required clear, explicit congressional authorization, which IEEPA did not provide. The general power to regulate commerce could not be stretched to justify such a sweeping tax scheme. These decisions set a strong precedent and framed the central question for the Supreme Court: did Congress clearly delegate its taxing power to the president through IEEPA? The lower court's answer was a resounding no. The stage was set for a landmark Supreme Court decision. In a landmark decision on October 24, 2025, the Supreme Court struck down the Trump tariffs, ruling the president exceeded his authority under IEEPA. The 6-3 majority, led by the Chief Justice, affirmed that the power to impose broad, economically significant taxes remains with Congress. The court relied on the major questions doctrine, finding IEEPA's general language insufficient for such a sweeping action. Congress, the opinion noted, knows how to delegate tariff authority explicitly, and did not do so here. The court distinguished between regulating trade and levying taxes, emphasizing that the latter is a core legislative function. The dissent argued for broader presidential authority in emergencies, but the majority prevailed. The ruling curtails the president's ability to use IEEPA for broad-based tariffs without explicit congressional approval. This decision marks a significant check on executive power in economic policy. The Supreme Court's decision will have immediate, far-reaching effects on the U.S. economy. Small businesses and manufacturers can expect relief as tariffs are lifted, lowering costs and stabilizing supply chains. Consumers will likely see lower prices on imported goods, easing inflationary pressures. States that join the lawsuit anticipate economic recovery as local businesses rebound. A key unresolved issue is whether the government must refund the trillions collected under the illegal tariffs. A question for future litigation. The ruling sets a powerful precedent. Presidents cannot use broad emergency powers to impose massive economic policies without clear congressional approval. Congress may now revisit and clarify the scope of presidential authority in trade and emergency laws. Ultimately, this decision resets the constitutional boundaries of presidential power and trade policy for generations to come.